Imagine standing in front of the Kaaba and looking at the enormous black cloth covering it. Have you ever wondered, why is the Kaaba covered in black? Was it always black? Who makes this enormous cloth? How much does it cost? How much gold is actually embroidered into it? And what happens to the old Kiswah when a new one is placed over the Kaaba? The answer takes us through centuries of Islamic history, craftsmanship, tradition, and the changing history of Makkah. This is the story of the Kiswah, the black covering of the Kaaba. And by the end of this documentary, you may never look at the Kaaba's black covering in quite the same way again. Every year, millions of Muslims arrive in Makkah. As they enter Masjid al-Haram, one sight immediately captures their attention: the Kaaba. And covering the entire structure is the famous black Kiswah, decorated with intricate Arabic calligraphy and golden embroidery. From a distance, it looks simple, a large black cloth. But when you look closely, it becomes something completely different. The surface contains enormous amounts of carefully designed calligraphy. The borders are decorated with intricate patterns, and some of the inscriptions are embroidered using materials containing gold and silver. But where did this tradition begin? To understand the Kiswah, we need to go back in history. The Kaaba has been covered for centuries, and historical accounts describe different coverings and different materials being used at different times. The color was not always necessarily the same throughout history. Different rulers and communities used different fabrics and colors. Historical sources mention coverings in colors including red, green, white, and black at different periods. So one of the biggest misconceptions is that the Kaaba has always been covered in exactly the same black Kiswah we see today. It has not. The appearance and production of the covering changed over time. But the tradition of covering the Kaaba became deeply established. Why cover the Kaaba at all? The Kiswah is not considered an object of worship. Muslims worship Allah alone. The Kaaba is the sacred house and the direction toward which Muslims face during prayer. The Kiswah is a covering and a symbol of the care given to the sacred structure. Over the centuries, producing and replacing the covering became an important responsibility associated with the custodianship of the Kaaba. And today, the Kiswah is produced with extraordinary precision. So how is it actually made? The modern Kiswah is produced in a specialized facility in Makkah. Inside the facility, highly skilled workers and specialists work on different stages of production. It is not simply a giant piece of black fabric. The Kiswah is made from high-quality textile material, with the main fabric traditionally being black silk. The fabric must meet very specific standards because it will cover the Kaaba in the center of Masjid al-Haram. But there is something even more impressive. The fabric is not simply dyed black and wrapped around the building. It is carefully measured, prepared, stitched, decorated, and assembled in sections. The dimensions have to correspond to the structure of the Kaaba. The different panels must align correctly. The embroidered inscriptions must be positioned accurately. And the final covering has to withstand the harsh environment of Makkah. Think about what the Kiswah experiences: extreme heat, strong sunlight, dust, humidity, constant movement of millions of pilgrims around the Kaaba, and continuous exposure to the environment. So the materials must be carefully selected. Now let's talk about the most recognizable part: the golden calligraphy. When you look at the Kaaba, you can see beautiful bands of Arabic calligraphy running across the black cloth. Not in the sense that the entire cloth is made from solid gold. That would be impossible and unnecessary. Instead, specific decorative elements and calligraphic embroidery use threads containing gold and silver materials. This is where the famous claims about the golden Kiswah can become confusing. The black cloth itself is not gold. The gold is used primarily in the embroidery and decorative elements. And the craftsmanship involved is extremely detailed. Imagine trying to create large Arabic letters using fine metallic threads. Now imagine doing this across enormous sections of fabric. And every letter has to remain visually balanced. Every line must follow the intended design. Every section must fit with the next. This is not ordinary textile work. It is specialized craftsmanship. And the inscriptions are not random decoration. They contain Quranic verses and Islamic phrases. The calligraphy gives the Kiswah its distinctive appearance. Against the deep black fabric, the golden embroidery becomes highly visible. This contrast is one reason the Kaaba looks so striking from a distance. But there is another question people frequently ask. Why black? As we mentioned earlier, the Kaaba has not always been covered in black throughout its entire history. The modern black Kiswah became the established tradition over time. Today, the black covering has become one of the strongest visual symbols associated with the Kaaba. When someone sees a black cube-shaped structure surrounded by pilgrims, they immediately recognize Makkah. But the black color itself does not mean that black is required for the Kaaba in Islamic belief. It is a historical and traditional choice. And this distinction is important. Now let's talk about the size. The Kiswah has to be enormous because the Kaaba itself is a large structure. The covering consists of multiple large sections that are assembled together. The lower edge is traditionally secured around the Kaaba, while the upper sections cover the walls. The covering also has a special opening around the Kaaba's door. The golden door is not covered by the black fabric. Instead, the Kiswah is carefully designed around it. And when you look at the door, the contrast becomes dramatic. Black fabric, golden metal, intricate calligraphy, and the bright marble courtyard surrounding the Kaaba. This combination has become one of the most recognizable images in the world. But perhaps the most surprising part of the Kiswah story is that it is replaced regularly. A new Kiswah is prepared for the Kaaba. The replacement has historically been associated with the annual Hajj period, and in recent years Saudi authorities have changed the timing of the replacement to the beginning of Muharram. The new Kiswah is carefully prepared in advance. Specialists make sure every section is ready. Then the old covering is removed and the new one is installed. Imagine the scale of that operation. The Kaaba cannot simply be treated like an ordinary building. Every step has to be carefully organized. The new Kiswah is raised and positioned around the structure. The individual sections are connected. The embroidered panels are aligned. The door area is fitted. And the lower part is secured. The result is a completely refreshed appearance of the Kaaba. But what happens to the old Kiswah? This is one of the questions people ask most often. Does someone sell it? Is it thrown away? Is it stored somewhere? Historically, parts of old Kiswah coverings have been distributed, preserved, or handled in different ways. The exact procedures can vary according to official policy and historical period. It is therefore better not to believe sensational stories claiming that the entire old Kiswah simply disappears into a secret vault. What we do know is that the old Kiswah has historical and cultural significance, and pieces from past coverings have been preserved in collections and museums. Some fragments have become valuable historical artifacts because they are connected to particular periods in the history of the Kaaba. Now think about the craftsmanship. A worker may spend hours creating a small section of embroidery. Another worker may prepare the fabric. Another may work on the calligraphy. Another may inspect the stitching. And eventually, all of these separate pieces become one enormous covering. This is why the Kiswah is not simply a piece of cloth. It is the result of thousands of individual decisions and countless hours of specialized work. And there is another detail that many people overlook. The Kiswah contains a special embroidered band that runs around the upper portion of the Kaaba. This band is one of its most recognizable features. It contains Quranic verses and inscriptions written in beautiful Arabic calligraphy. When sunlight hits the metallic embroidery, the writing appears to glow against the black fabric. At night, the effect can be even more dramatic under the lighting of Masjid al-Haram. But the Kiswah is not only beautiful. It also serves a practical purpose. It protects the outer surface of the Kaaba from environmental exposure. It creates a distinctive visual appearance. And it represents the care and respect given to the sacred structure. Now let's address another common question. Does touching the Kiswah bring special supernatural powers? There are many claims about this online. But Muslims should distinguish between cultural practices, personal emotions, and established religious teachings. The Kiswah itself is not worshipped. It does not have independent power. And simply touching a piece of cloth should not be presented as a guaranteed source of miracles or blessings without reliable religious evidence. The importance of the Kiswah comes from its connection to the Kaaba and the sacred history of Makkah. That is already significant enough. Now imagine the scene on the day the new Kiswah is installed. The Kaaba stands at the center of the mosque. The old covering is carefully removed. The new black fabric is brought into position. Workers climb and secure the sections. The golden embroidery becomes visible. The door area is fitted. And slowly, the Kaaba receives its new covering. Millions of Muslims may watch this process through photographs and video, but only a small number of people actually participate in the physical work. For them, it is not an ordinary textile project. It is a responsibility connected to one of the most important sites in Islam, and that responsibility requires precision. One mistake in measurement could affect the alignment. One mistake in stitching could affect an entire panel. One mistake in embroidery could change the appearance of an important inscription. That is why the production process involves specialists. Now let's look at the Kiswah from another perspective. A pilgrim may arrive in Makkah after traveling thousands of kilometers. They may have saved money for years. They may have waited for a long time for the opportunity to perform Hajj or Umrah. And when they finally see the Kaaba, the first thing they see is that black covering. For many people, the emotional moment is impossible to describe. The Kiswah becomes part of their first memory of seeing the Kaaba. But the black cloth itself is not the reason the Kaaba is sacred. Its significance comes from the Kaaba and its place in Islamic worship and history. The cloth is a covering. The house is the sacred center. And Allah is the one Muslims worship. This distinction is important when discussing Islamic history. There is also a fascinating connection between the Kiswah and the changing technology of Makkah. Centuries ago, producing a huge embroidered covering would have required extremely labor-intensive manual work. Today, modern machinery can assist with parts of the textile and embroidery process, but skilled human craftsmanship remains essential. Technology may improve efficiency. It does not eliminate the need for precision. And that is why the modern Kiswah is a fascinating combination of traditional Islamic craftsmanship and modern production techniques. So how much does the Kiswah cost? You will find many different numbers online. Some estimates vary significantly depending on the year, the materials included, production costs, and what is being counted. The safest way to understand the question is this. The Kiswah represents a substantial production expense involving high-quality materials, specialized textile work, embroidery, skilled labor, maintenance, and installation, but its value cannot really be reduced to a simple price tag. Because for Muslims, its importance is historical and religious rather than commercial. It is not produced as a luxury product for sale. It is produced for the Kaaba, and that makes its story unique. Now look again at the Kaaba. The black fabric, the golden embroidery, the golden door, the black stone, the Hajj or Ismail, the millions of pilgrims. Every visible detail has a story, and the Kiswah is one of those details that most people see but rarely stop to understand. It has changed in color and design across history. It has been produced in different places and under different authorities. Its materials and techniques have developed, but its role has remained connected to the Kaaba. And perhaps that is the most fascinating thing about it. The Kiswah is renewed, but the Kaaba remains. Generation after generation, pilgrim after pilgrim, century after century, the cloth changes, the embroidery changes, the craftsmen change, the technology changes, but the Kaaba remains at the center of Makkah. So the next time you see that enormous black covering, don't simply think of it as a black cloth. Think about the craftsmen who produced it. Think about the calligraphy embroidered into it. Think about the centuries of tradition behind it. Think about the millions of pilgrims who have stood before it. And remember that what appears simple from a distance can contain an extraordinary amount of history. The Kiswah is not made entirely of gold. The Kaaba was not always covered in the same color. And the black covering is not something Muslims worship. It is a carefully crafted covering with a long and fascinating history. A history that connects craftsmanship, tradition, Makkah, and one of the most recognizable sacred structures on earth. And there is still another story hiding in plain sight. If the Kiswah is replaced, what happens to the Kaaba itself? How often has the Kaaba actually been rebuilt? Which parts are ancient? Which parts have been replaced? And what happened to the structure during the great floods and conflicts that shaped the history of Makkah? That is where the story becomes even more fascinating. Subscribe to Sacred History AI, because in the next documentary, we will go deeper into the history of the Kaaba and uncover the major reconstructions that changed its shape over the centuries.